Okay, ladies and gentlemen, to overcome our postprandial fatigue, you are in for a special treat now. We have discussed a lot of examples in the morning of challenges, and now we want to look forward as well and highlight opportunities and how we will drive the future of a successful European healthcare system. So who can do this better than Tony Humphreys, who used to be my line manager for quite a couple of years, and will deliver a lecture about how the EU innovation ecosystem can be enhanced. He is very well known to European regulators and was involved in driving EU strategies within the last 2 decades. So it's a pleasure, really, Tony, to have you here. Thank you very much. Looking forward to your talk.
Thanks very much for that, Falk. And if we can maybe just have the presentation come up, that would be good. Or am I in charge of it myself? I probably am. I have to start, of course, to thank the organizers of this event. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I've enjoyed the morning tremendously, and I know the rest of the afternoon will be wonderful, so you have to survive me for the next 20 minutes or so. Let's see how that goes. In particular, I do want to thank Eleanor Agricola and Paolo Foggi for giving me the direct invitation. It's always a pleasure to come here in Rome. And they set me the question together with Falk. They said to how to concretely make regulators impactful in translating innovation into successful medicinal products. So that's quite something to sort of digest. And really, and we've heard a lot about that in quite some detail in the earlier morning sessions. And I suppose what are you going to get out of me in the next while is really a personal perspective on how do we as a regulatory system in Europe, respond to this perpetual challenge. And the focus I'll have, simply because it's my background, is on the regulatory system, the regulatory response. But I'm very aware that for a true innovative ecosystem, you need the other elements that we've heard about this morning. You need the financial elements, both the seed sort of research coming from Horizon Europe, the sort of translational funding. You need the sort of access to the venture capital, and then the follow-on sort of investments. That's on the finance side. And we already heard, and even from the academic developers, the importance of intellectual property protection. And both of those areas would deserve, a conference in itself in how do we make it all work together. But I will just limit myself on the regulatory aspect, and if you'll forgive me, I'll take a rather long-term view on this with a sort of 30-year perspective, but I'll get to the immediate future in the end. Okay. I did the origins of our system, and it's very interesting to sort of hear, Pharma Industria saying, the importance of a biotech sector, even the Commission representative talking about a sort of a biotech type regulation. The origins of the centralized system absolutely was to establish a community authorization procedure for technologically advanced medicinal products, and in particular those derived from an EU biotech industry. So we've had an EU biotech industry, 70s, 80s, and it's doing very, very well. And there's no doubt, from this morning you might have the impression that it's in decline, and that's actually not the case. A lot of metrics show growth. The matter is there are other regions of the world equally growing and growing faster, and that's North America and indeed the rise of China, which is inexorable. But there's no doubt that we have a very successful industry base in Europe, and we need to grow it and facilitate it. Okay. Also, again, just looking back on the long view, we have, as regulators, put in a systematic extension of this stimulus to innovation. And it started off with the orphan medicinal products, and of course we all know the challenges of rare disease, etc. And what better products are gene and cell therapies to try to address those specific challenges, and we are seeing them progressing through the pipelines now. So these are long-term investments. We had the enlargement of Europe, a big bang, making us a massive sort of, life science pharmaceutical market, 2004. And biotech products were considered so important that we had a mandatory scope of all of these different indications, and particularly for those biotech products, because to not allow an industry to somehow cherry pick Europe as a market, so they couldn't just pick sort of high value markets that they would see, they'd have to apply centrally, and conceptually that product then becomes accessible to all. We all know the story downstream from that, but that was at least the hope in the beginning, the vision. We then also had the pediatric medicinal products, and that was a little bit of a carrot and a stick, but it was essentially, you know, obliging the industry to consider the needs of pediatrics and combining rewards with regards to those obligations, and in particular also encouraging, and it's interesting maybe in the discussion to come back to it, translating off-label uses to on-label uses, particularly in the pediatric area, and coming up with age-appropriate formulations, etc. Along comes the advanced therapy medicinal products, and I know, Falk, you said that was like a first in the world at its time, 2007, 2009, maybe when we had the first meeting, and Kieran Breen covered that very well this morning. And of course, we had the identification of the hospital exemption route in addition to then the more industrial processes and the promise that we saw coming through the pipeline there. You might be surprised that I would present the pharmacovigilance legislation as a stimulus to innovation, but I see it in the sense that it allows the life cycle management of products, and we all know, and particularly with the HTA colleagues and pricing and assessor authorities downstream, what are the long-term benefits, what are the long-term outcomes of these products, and we really need to be able to answer that with real-world evidence, and the pharmacovig framework allows us to do that. And then, certainly not the final thing, but along the way, along comes the clinical trial regulation. And again, we hear, you know, very negative perspectives on the state of clinical trials, the health of clinical trials in Europe. But we really should advance the case, the positive, the more optimistic case, in that we really do have a world-class research community here in Europe with massive experience in conducting very high-quality clinical trials. We have an evolving regulatory environment that facilitates that conduct. The clinical trial regulation in itself only entered into force because of the database linkage 2022-2023, so we're really just getting to grips to what the consequences of that are and whether or not then we can reverse the long-term trend of a relative decline in clinical trials in Europe vis-a-vis other regions, North America and then Asia Pacific as well. And we also have this ability, and back to Paolo Foggi and the colleagues and all of the Eleanor and the National Innovative Networks, to get innovative clinical trial design advice. So this really is the positive case for Europe, building on the physicians, the professionals, the pharmacists, the healthcare systems. In addition, then, that translates that then into an accelerating clinical trials initiative in Europe, and this is very much a joint initiative by the HMA, the Commission, and we really, with that sort of leadership and with that push behind, we really can deliver a change in this area and judge us on the metric, judge us on the outcome about reversing that decline in the number of trials conducted. Personally, I'm actually very confident that that is possible to do, and certainly all of the key actors are aligned to make that happen. No pressure on the chair, of which we had earlier on just before lunch, Marion Lund, sir. It's not a personal responsibility, but you're certainly one of the key leadership to make that happen. One other thing I wanted to talk about, because along with that sort of stimulus to innovation, there was the whole revision of the whole medical device framework, etc., going along. It chucked out diagnostics, medical device regulation around about 2017, and we have a certain exposure to that, and certainly ATMPs were always seen as a best case or of the ability to utilize device, diagnostic, and digital with regards to healthcare outcomes. And suffice to say, although we don't have an integrated framework necessarily at the European level, in many of the member states, certainly the enlightened ones, there is an integration of that authority, and there's certainly a willingness amongst the system to actually make this work. So this is certainly a long-held ambition that we have, and I believe I'll pick it up again within the review, but it's certainly something that we are open to try to make happen, and certainly structures that you've heard, all of those support structures that you've heard about this morning are part of making that happen. Okay. I think we heard from the pharma industry colleague that we needed a strategy in Europe, and that's absolutely the case. If you don't plan, how do you know if you're ever going to arrive anywhere? How do you know, are you ever going to move the needle on anything? So we have quite a few strategies in Europe in trying to foster an innovative development ecosystem. And it would be remiss of me if I don't point out Guido Rassi there, who's in the front in this meeting, that he was the inspiration and the vision behind the regulatory science strategy to 25, which then fed into the network strategy, which then fed into the pharmaceutical strategy. There's no doubt about that. And then on the flip side of that, there was also the engagement with strategic research and innovation, and particularly an opening up, certainly at the agency and the network, to the collaboration with the academic sector. So I wanted to talk about the latest strategy. It was just mentioned they have actually extended the strategy now to 28. One of the reasons they have gone on for 28 and not a 5-year extension is to allow space essentially for the pharmaceutical review, which is going to drop in, you could estimate around that 28, 29 time period. If you look at what's in that strategy about accelerating the translation of innovation to therapy, so the innovation side of things, what do you find? You have the promotion of integration of science and technology in medicine's development. You have fostering the generation of high quality and impactful evidence. And you also have promoting the stakeholders' cooperation. And these are all fine words, and in fact you'll find them in many strategy documents over the years, but judge the words by the reality on which they're being delivered. What gets delivered, how are they getting delivered? And certainly structures like the EU Innovation Network, structures like the Borderline Classification Group, they're actually key, and structures like the CTCG, Clinical Trial Coordination Group, are actually key to making these sort of ambitions happen. And I want to just briefly touch on two sort of hot topics that are coming out of this extension strategy to 28. So the first of those is artificial intelligence. I actually haven't heard too much about artificial intelligence up to lunchtime today, so I was just wondering who was going to actually raise it. And in talking about artificial intelligence, you need to sort of ask the question, well, you know, what are we talking about? Are we talking about machine learning? Are we talking about large language models? Are we talking about neural networks? Are we talking about something else? And in the reality is, we're talking about all of those things. I mean, it's been absolutely brought to the fore by the release of the ChatGPT back in 2022, but it's caused major reaction, not just in our sector, but across the board. What has been our regulatory response? In Europe, we dropped out a 5-year multi-annual AI work plan. That's under the sort of leadership of the Big Data Steering Group, because, you know, big data was indeed very hot topic, identified even 10, 15 years ago, real-world evidence and the digitalization of healthcare records. And in parallel with us here in Europe, FDA have also dropped out a discussion paper on AI and machine learning in the development of drugs and biologicals. And it's very important that we as regulators give these signals that we are open to the adoption of these technologies. And whether you're a skeptic about AI and think it's all hype, or whether you're a believer in AI and it really is ground changing, the reality is, and this is based on FDA figures, 85% of NDA submissions contain elements of AI right across the life cycle. And that's the stuff that was declared by the companies. We know in the drug discovery setting there are AI biotech first only companies, and that's not even declared necessarily to the regulator. And it's up to us then to engage with all of those use cases and try to provide some sort of regulatory certainty as to when they land. The other thing that we covered this morning, we had a very interesting presentation. I was busy with my camera, even though I'm always assured that we're going to get the slides afterwards, but everybody else also does the same, is the health technology assessment. And guys, that's why maybe I started with the history, the origin of the centralized procedure, because back in the day, we thought naively that was going to solve the access problem in Europe, but sadly, guys, it doesn't. And is this health technology, the way it's currently framed, is that going to solve? It's a part of the jigsaw. And to be honest, and I really have a lot of sympathy for those expert colleagues in that area, they will have to come together. It's a bit like what Gonzalo raised in the question, to sort of converge their working practices. And again, it reminds me of the early days then of the centralized procedure, because it's not a given, but in the end we made it work, and there's no reason whatsoever why this can't be made to work. It is a world first, guys. So again, we're doing something to enable the access in a world first type of design. I want to finish, and you'll be glad to share that I'm heading towards a finish, is with the review. And again, it was touched on this morning, and maybe the overarching question, you know, that was asked in the last session about how do you improve EU competitiveness, making us compete with North America, Asia Pacific. This is the diagnostic problem statement from the Commission that underpins essentially the review. The medical needs of patients aren't sufficiently met. The affordability is a challenge for the health systems. We had the excellent discussion then with the academic developers vis-a-vis maybe then what the industry will do with the field of advanced therapies. Unequal access, we all know the story there. And in fact, the fact that pharmaceutical products have potentially negative impacts on the environment. The last one I shouldn't ignore because I was intimately involved myself. The system doesn't sufficiently cater for innovation, so the demand is inexhaustible despite all of the wonderful tools that we just talked about before lunch. And we do create unnecessary administrative burden. So actually, do we need to borrow Elon Musk from President Trump when he gets into power and ask him to go cutting red tape? And that's just maybe a crazy idea, which you can edit out of the tape later, maybe, yeah? Okay. So, but let's just quickly look at these incentives. I've carved out the incentives for innovation, just personally. You can do your own carve out. One is the infamous data exclusivity and the fact that this is being curtailed, but the fact that it's being given back for additional indications, comparative clinical trials, high unmet medical need, and market launch. And here, of course, we see a complete overlap with sort of HTA-type ambitions downstream. I call this shifting the elephant because it really is. And it's not by accident that there's a vast clustering of all the development on oncology, immunology, and there are vast areas of therapeutic areas that are unmet. And guys, and Professor Locatelli said this morning, you know, some of my products are saving lives, guys, and it's not a nice choice. You know, if there isn't the economic imperative that's going to drive a private developer to do something, isn't it good that we have an alternative mechanism to somehow address that, ergo the discussion hospital exemption. But also then, there's other elements there on pre-authorization support, faster authorization, and even earlier market entry of generics and biosimilar medicines. And with the CAT chair there sitting beside the CTCG chair, I want to throw the challenge. Do you believe biosimilar ATMPs are possible? I will give you the presumed answer. She's nodding her head, so I'm happy she says that. People say, not yet, but... But it's coming. But people say gene therapy probably easier than cell therapy. So let's see. But I mean, without a doubt, we need a biosimilar chaser because that keeps the brand, you know, that keeps the motivation for the brand to innovate up. It's applied in the classical generics market. No reason why it shouldn't work in biosimilars. On the streamlined regulatory framework, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because otherwise the chair is going to shoot me dead. Faster authorization is pretty fast. And to some extent, when we introduced the system back in 95, you know, 6 months, 7 months was pretty fast on the active clock stop. Maybe, without a doubt, benchmarking with other regions in the world, we've lost ability to compete. And Commission is putting it down to say 6 month standard and essentially 150 days, what's that in... That's, God, I can't even do my maths on the 4 months if it's accelerated. And there's also room, if you look there on the streamlined regulatory, repurposing data analysis of evidence for not-for-profit entries. So this is the third way, and there's a lot of, I think, interest in making this third way happen. We have the current ATMP pilot, which I believe you'll hear about, you've already heard about, and maybe you'll hear some case studies later on. On the development support, I won't spend a lot of time. Scientific advice has already been wonderfully presented by Valentina and others before the break. But the fact that there is this basis for us to deal with SOHO, the HTA pairs, all those interface areas will be, so long as it survives the co-decision process, will be in the legislation. Prime will be in the legislation. Phased review will be in the legislation, building on the experience with regards to the pandemic. And this idea of regulatory sandboxes, nobody really knows how regulatory sandboxes are going to play out, but that's the idea behind a regulatory sandbox. If you know, then you don't need the sandbox, you know. And so let's at least have it. I mean, otherwise I'll be very upset, you know. Yeah. Novel types of applications, platform marketing authorizations, that was referred to as an explicit request. I think it was Alexander Natz was actually talking about that. We are very supportive of that as well. And particularly that point about you cannot take an MA for 1 to 2 patients. It's economically not viable. So we need some sort of new licensing tool. Hey guys, we innovated a core platform for swine flu back in the noughties, so I don't see why we can't do it here. Temporary emergency marketing use, conditional is alive and well, and hospital exemption for ATMPs is alive and well. Good luck with the discussion with the commissions next week. So this is my last slide. You'll be happy to hear, Chair. The EC review tries to advance, and I believe we as a network system are behind that because, you know, the EC did a massive amount of stakeholder consultation and certainly listened to us as regulators as well. One, we want to attract pharmaceutical R&D by providing a future-proof, stable legal framework and a favourable regulatory environment. That's all. The mood music is very good. I always find stable and future-proof a little bit of a tension. How can something be stable if the bloody thing is moving so fast, you know? But relative, you know, islands of stability in a sea of change, yeah? We want to boost the regulatory support. This is what an occasion like this, and it's wonderful that the AIFA colleagues have made this happen together with the other members of the network, and we're hosted here. We really do. I was struck by the survey that Martha had saying, these guys don't even know we exist. They don't know the tools we have, you know, that sort of low level. Who are they, you know? And the fact that regulators are terrifying, you know. I might be a little terrifying. The wonderful panels we've had before are less terrifying. The more targeted incentive framework, I mean, this, obviously, you know, the brand industry, if you listen to them, this is the death of the pharmaceutical industry in Europe. 35 years ago, the EPAR was going to be the death of the pharmaceutical industry in Europe. It's in rude health, frankly speaking. We'd like it to be in ruder health, but let's see how that plays out. But to shift the elephant, to get development into unmet medical needs, that has got to be a legitimate ambition, so let's have a discussion about that. And why would we have a problem about boosting innovation through an efficient and a simplified regulatory framework? And yeah, guys, AI will enable a lot more efficient processes. That is transsectoral, and we're looking at it inside inside the agency. I have to remind myself where I am at the moment, and I'm not looking at it personally anymore, but it definitely can help us deliver. So with that, I will thank you very much, and hopefully I've convinced that we have done, you know, we really are seriously committed to try to enable innovation in Europe so that we do have a thriving biotech and a thriving ATMP scene going forward into the future. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tony. Inspiring, and as you can see, the future looks bright. So there are opportunities to look forward to. So it's my pleasure to announce the next session, session 3, hot topics, opportunities for improvement. And the two chairs, Marian Pasmuji and Concetta Guitardelli, please come forward and proceed with the session. Thank you.
Oh, we would like to have the speaker on the...
So it's my pleasure, so Marion Pasmoy, and it's my pleasure to introduce together with, or co-chair together with Concetta Guitardelli this session. So I'm heading the science department, that's the Dutch Medicines Agency, and I'm also a member of the EU Innovation Network. And it's about hot topics, also challenging topics, and it's also a bit of a challenging session because we have 3 10-minute presentations and 10 minutes for discussion. But we aim to stick to the time so we don't get into the coffee break. So the topics will be on genetically modified organism framework, combined developments, and also the hospital exemption. And several of these topics were already mentioned before in the presentation of Maria, but also in other presentations. So it's really topics that are good to discuss in detail. I just want to mention for the Slido, I'm not sure if it's posted, so the code, and you can ask questions during the, also online, questions during the presentations, and then we can feed into the session later on. And then I would like to give the word to my co-chair.
Thank you very much, Marian. So let's welcome the first speaker, that is the colleague Claire Benieux She holds a PhD biology and works on as a non-clinical assessor for Belgian Federal Agency for Medicinal Health Products, and she's a member of the Committee for Advanced Therapy. And she has 10 minutes to speak about the GMO framework. I don't know how you will do, so please, Claire.
I will do it in 10 minutes, I hope. Why about talking about the GMO framework? Because of course, many of the ATMPs are GMOs, and so are submitted to the GMO laws, which are the same as for any genetically modified organism, like plants, for example. So the GMO frameworks, which applies to ATMPs, is double. So there are two directives. One directive on the contained use of GMOs. Contained use, it means that some specific measures allow to avoid contact of the GMO with the environment. And the second directive is the directive on the deliberate release, is when you don't have these measures, or you cannot have these measures, to avoid completely the release into the environment, and that we can consider that there is a risk. And for example, it's a patient treated with a viral vector that sheds this viral vector in its fluids and can expose people around in and the environment to this product. So this framework was not developed specifically for medicinal products. The medicinal products concerned are, for example, the vaccines, but also include the gene therapy medicinal products. So both the viral vectors and the genetically modified cells are considered as organisms by the GMO authorities. So this compliance to this GMO framework is a legal requirement because it's set in two directives. It has given rise to different national laws in each member states. And it also should be noted that this risk are assessed differently during the development, because then it's the national competent authorities for the clinical trials who assess the products under their law, and at marketing authorization, where the risk is assessed in a centralized way. So this is to show how Europe has applied the two different directives. So you have in blue the deliberate release, and in red the contained used. But then you have also countries using both directives, both together, both separately, some having other frameworks, and some for which we have no information. But you see with the panel of color that it's a very complex regulatory environment, and especially as a lot of gene therapy products are also often products that need to be developed very often across borders, it means that applicants have to apply for the clinical trials, but also multiple times for these GMO authorizations in all of the different concerned member states. So in each country, usually it's a different competent authority that assesses this risk. It's not the medicine product competent authority. They have all different procedures with different requirements and different timelines. And just to illustrate how complex it can be, this is the assessment in Belgium. In Belgium, we are a federal state with 3 regions, and they all have their own rules, which means when you submit a document under contained use, you have an answer, a response at 45 days in 2 regions, but for the Walsh region, you need to wait until day 140. For the deliberate release, it's more centralized, it's 90 days, but it was still an issue to us in many circumstances. It has been an issue during Corona, because you see our assessment time in Belgium for a clinical trial is an average of 45 days, 45 to 58 days, which was much shorter than the decision for the GMO. But in time of Corona, we accelerated this assessment in 4 calendar days, but it was impossible to do for the GMO framework because they don't have any emergency procedure and could not adapt to our timelines. There had to be an exemption, but we also had problems also before, even for other products, for vaccines, where for the when there was the Ebola epidemic in Africa, we would send health personnel there. They had it had been approved compassionate use for a vaccine, which was under assessment at the EMA, but they could not get it eventually because of the GMO authorization, which could not keep up with the time. So because of this complexity and the picture I've just shown of the multiple procedures in all Europe, it was decided to have a work group working at the interplay of the ATMPs and the GMO legislation, and this group was composed of people from the CAT, so from national competent authorities, and from GMO competent authorities. So we worked, of course, in the context of clinical trials to try to simplify and harmonize this procedure. It's on a voluntary basis because it cannot be legally binding. These documents have to be agreed, and it's voluntary per country. We published all the documents we wrote for this harmonization on the website of the European Commission, and I give the link here. So the first step was to provide a repository of national requirements. So if you go to that part of the website of the European Commission, you can see per country what are the requirements. Then you have the links to the different procedures, to the competent authorities, etc. But so what we produced in the few years we worked together in this interplay group, our first question and answers document. Relating to the frequently asked question. For example, I already have a clinical trial approved with that product. Do I still need to obtain a GMO authorization for the second one, for the second phase, for example? So these are pragmatic questions and answers. We have produced good practice documents and common application forms for different types of products, for AAVs and viral vectors, and also for genetically modified cells. And for each of these documents, which are so simplified and harmonized, you have the list of countries that have endorsed each of these documents. So, in theory, this should simplify the matter. In practice, what we hear is that even in countries which have signed this agreement, some documents are sometimes added as a request, and so the harmonization is not fully reached. And so there is still a lot of room for improvement. And we hope that it will come with the evolution of the pharmaceutical legislation. So the aim of the changes that are now included in the new proposition was meant to be the transfer of the GMO assessment from the GMO framework to the pharma framework, where we have more flexibility, where we can adapt to crisis situation, for example. And there would be also a transfer of the ERA assessment competence to the EMA with an opinion by the CHMP. So the environmental risk assessment would be submitted under the CETIS platform, which is the platform used for clinical trials. So this would simplify the submission at least. The CHMP would give an opinion after 45 days. And the EMA would also be responsible to draft guidelines which would lead to harmonization. So I think there we need to be we still need to see how it will work, but we will need really to be careful that we really simplify the process, that we don't add a layer of complexity, and especially when we look at the task of CHMP, which are increasing, it's difficult to see how it will function, that CHMP addresses all the environmental risk assessments for the clinical trials. And the second part is that usually clinical trials, even under CETIS, they are assessed by member states and by the member states which are concerned by this clinical trial. And here in that proposition, it's also not clear how this will be taken into account, this prerogative of the member states concerned by this clinical trial. So there is room for improvement, there is hope, but I think we should still check that what we do goes in the right direction. Thank you.
thank you so much for your presentation, like highlighting the challenges, but also really on the last slides, also giving the ideas for improvement in relation to the pharmaceutical legislation change. So then I would like to introduce the next speaker, who is Dr. Ilona Reischel. She's a quality assessor at the Austrian Medicines and Medical Devices Agency and the current chair of the Committee for Advanced Therapies, and she will talk about combined developments.
I'm going to be talking about ATMPs specifically, or the CAT. This is about my hobby, interfaces. So, legal placement. Where do we have interfaces? Particularly with ATMPs, we have quite a few of them. Sorry, I need to... and I'm only picking out two of them. So I'm not talking about the GMOs, we've just heard about those, talking about the interface to medical devices and to IVDs. Again, the interface per se is not unique to ATMPs, all the products have them. And my talk today is, in 10 minutes you can't tell people what to do. I'm just going to try to give you the framework to identify when does that interface apply to my project. Why is it important? Well, I'm going to click through this clearly. It might be a single project for you as a developer, but if you're combining device and IVD aspects and potentially GMO aspects, the unfortunate situation is at the moment that you're going to need 4 different approvals. So the clinical trial, obviously, the GMO you've just heard about, but if you're co-developing an independent medical device, so not a non-integral medical device, you need a clinical investigation approved. And if you're then co-developing an IVD, which might become a companion diagnostic, then it's also a performance study. And even keeping the documents apart or combined, depending on what you want to do, that is a challenge. The good news is this is finally being talked about. It's not really great news because the legal texts were available since 2015, so it was kind of predictable that we're going to have problems, but never mind. At the moment, where do you have information? You're supposed to add in the cover letter to the clinical trial whether you have any devices or IVDs as part of your clinical trial. The one thing that I want to emphasize that for medical devices, it's not enough to just have a CE mark to consider it authorized. You also need to look at what is the intended use. And in other words, if what you're using is a CE-marked device or IVD, but it's not for that specific intended use, then it is by default investigational. And whatever I'm going to talk about now is going to apply to you. So with medical devices and ATMPs, there are 2 different scenarios. So I already said it's only legally on the market if it's for the intended purpose. But with the ATMPs, you have the 2 options of an integral and a non-integral device. What is non-integral? It's an independent device that you're providing with your investigational product or something that's already on the market. So, for example, refillable administration devices or dedicated surgical tools. On the other hand, integral devices are not self-standing, they are part of your ATMP. And therefore, the overall product is governed by the medicines legislation. So in that setting, the device is only a component of your overall medicinal product. And depending on what it's used for, the data need to be proportional. And I'm going to go into that in more detail. This is not meant to. So, in the setting of the medicinal product, you have, in the case of the integral setting, you could either have the device component as part of your product that is administered to the patient, or you could have it as integral but part of the container closure. So it's in contact with the medicinal product, but it's not in itself administered. And obviously, the scientific data that are required in both of those settings are different. If it's part of the product to be administered, then you have to consider it in the potency assay, you have to consider it for the mechanism of action. On the other hand, if it's non-integral, then the settings are either it's provided with the investigational product, which ends up at being co-packaged at marketing authorization, or it's available on the market as it is, like a type 1 inhaler. But with the ATMPs in particular, you might also have to co-develop a surgical tool that is unique for your product. I remember a situation where you had to have a syringe administering very low volumes because upon injection into the muscle, you couldn't overload the site with too many cells because they would become necrotic. So obviously, for example, in the last setting, it's a co-development. So by default, the device cannot be CE marked at the time of the clinical trial. And that's very important to recognize, that you cannot expect the devices to be CE marked at the time you conduct the clinical trial, because very frequently they're being co-developed. Now I'm switching to the IVDs. So, biomarkers are more and more popular, more and more biomarker-guided development. There's in fact a guidance that's being worked on at the moment on the level of EMA. That's not ATMP specific, but on biomarker-guided development. So, first of all, you have a biomarker. What is the setting for that biomarker? Is it qualified? What are the data on that biomarker? But then also, how are you measuring it? And if in the clinical trial you are taking a decision on the basis of the results of that assay, then it fulfills the definition of an IVD, an interventional IVD, or a companion diagnostic that is being developed. If, on the other hand, you use it for the measurement of an endpoint, then by definition, it's not necessarily an IVD, but if, full stop. If, on the other hand, you already know that you want to use those data for conformity assessment of an IVD, you're still under the IVDR requirements. So there are two different perspectives. The perspective of the clinical trial, where in a specific setting, the interventional setting, the IVD definition applies. But also you need to look at it from the assay perspective. Are you planning to develop an IVD? So that's why I'm saying the first one, the IVD definition, depends on the details of the clinical protocol. Are there decisions taken on the basis of this assay? The second one is a development issue. There have been two documents where this has already been outlined. The question and answer on the interface between clinical trial regulation and IVDR. That's an MDCG guidance that's also available on on Eurolex Volume 10. And then question 5 of the question and answer on complex clinical trials. I'm not going to go through that in detail. You're going to get the slides. This is the definition of a companion diagnostic. It's used to identify before and or during treatments patients likely to benefit or are at increased risk. And for me, it's sort of similar to biosimilars. For me, until the consultation procedure is done at the time of marketing authorization, it's an intended companion diagnostic or interventional IVD during development. And the requirements legally are exactly the same, so it doesn't make a difference. What is different between the medicines, the clinical trial regulation, and the IVDR is that there are different reporting requirements depending on what kind of setting you have. And it's important to point out, as you see here, that an interventional IVD setting and a CDX setting is exactly the same. And it means you need to have an ethics committee opinion, the submission needs to be validated, and it's being assessed. And the only situation where a companion diagnostic has lower requirements is the next one. If you are conducting a study on leftover samples. Something that usually comes up with academics is what are the requirements for in-house assays. And I'm not going to go into the IVDR requirements for in-house assays. That's for a different time and place. But just to say, the in-house assays are the ones within the hospital. And per se, they do not require the conduct of performance studies. However, if they are investigated in a systematic way, that does qualify as a performance study. So I'm going to go through that quickly. So, to summarize what I've told you, in a clinical trial, there are two options. Either you're using an assay in an interventional setting or in a non-interventional setting. If you're using it in an interventional setting, then the definition according to the IVDR for an IVD applies. Whether you call it an investigational IVD or an investigational companion diagnostic doesn't really make a difference in the scientific requirements, and in both cases the IVDR applies. If you're using an assay in a clinical trial in a non-interventional setting, then it depends. Then it's up to you whether you are planning to use these data for a later conformity assessment. If the answer is yes, then you are under IVDR requirements. If the answer is no, then there is one thing you need to satisfy, and that is it a suitable tool for the clinical trial? So independent of legal requirements coming from the IVDR, you're always under GCP, and so you need to demonstrate the suitability of your tools. And that is then an assay in the context of the trial only. And then we have the last one, the residual samples and investigating CDX. And this, I think, is my last slide, just to show you it is a very complicated topic. I think we should have come to a solution a long time ago because the problem has been known, but at least now there are really active discussions, and hopefully this is a slide that's actually slightly out of date, but the Combine project is hopefully leading to a way forward. But I think in all these cases, there needs to be the pressure to have a solution. What we don't want and what we don't need is endless discussions about what the problems are. We need a discussion on what the solutions are, and we need to carry them out. And that's it from me. Thanks.
So thank you, Ilana, to cover this difficult topic, and you give us a clear scenario of the clear scenario. Thank you. So let me welcome the last speaker, that is Sandra Pretaglia. She's the head of pre-authorization division in AIFA. She's the Italian national contact point for the clinical trials and the clinical trial coordination group. And she will touch the point, or the easy point of the hospital exemption.
In 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Well,
also for
after
you, no
IVDR,
exemption for the
no
hospital
exceptions,
exemption.
okay, no exceptions for the time, and I will try to stick to the time also because this topic has been touched upon several times today. So the question for the audience, for the stakeholders, for ourselves, still remains, and it will be for the next years to address it in a new scenario with a new pharma environment and framework. So do we consider hospital exemption an accelerator of innovation or an obstacle to innovation? It depends from the point of view, and some of these points of view have already been addressed this morning and today in several discussions before. For sure, this is a unique tool we have in Europe, and with the fantastic advantage of providing a clinical response in high unmet medical needs, where no innovative authorized products exist. What type of ATMPs are covered by hospital exemptions? Actually, all types of ATMPs have been part of some hospital exemptions somewhere in Europe. A wide range of indication, increasingly wider and wider, as the science and progress also in academic development grows. Scale of manufacturing. These products can go from very, very few batches, very, very few patients, so the real unmet need, to over 1,000 batches, so over 1,000 patients. And that's where the issue is and the different approaches we are facing now in Europe. The potential for clinical development has been addressed a few times today as well for hospital exemption. And this is something regulators do not usually assess, at least in most member states with a couple of exceptions, not exemptions. The legal provision is Article 28 of the ATMP regulation, where we have a few standpoints and not too much detailed definition of the matter. So the standpoints is it has to be a non-routine basis product prepared on a custom-made. It's a custom-made product prepared under individual medical prescription. It has to be used within a member state and in hospitals. Then we have the basics, the foundation, in all member states, the quality standards, which is the added value that at that time was very relevant. This high-level definition has led to different interpretation of the hospital exemption across member states, going from the type of authorization, it can be a single shot, so one patient like we have in Italy, to a license that can be unlimited or for a given duration of years. We have different guidance at national level, what custom-made is, the number of patients that can be treated. Also, we have different approaches with regard to coverage of costs for hospital exemptions. There are a few publications addressing the topic going around. This is a report from INBEO that addresses the differences across 4 member states. And where we have differences, for example, is in the main difference we have across member states is the interpretation of the non-routine basis and the motivation for using the hospital exemption tool. For example, in France and Italy, it can be alongside clinical trial. We've had the presentation this morning from Professor Locatelli where patients can miss the eligible window for enrolling in a clinical trial, and so a parallel hospital exemption can also provide a response, a clinical response to patients who are still in need of a treatment. While in other member states like Germany and Spain, it can be also a tool to gather evidence together with clinical trials but it will be discussed later on, I presume, with a view to obtaining a central authorization. Also, the organization that can have the license can be different among member states. In some member states, like in Italy, it's only public hospitals. In other member states, also private hospitals, of course. In Italy and in some member states, we need the requirement of high unmet medical need. Not in all member states, the interpretation is different. And also the presence of alternative options. In some member states, like in Italy, it's mandatory, the lack of any alternative. In other member states, this is not happening. What we have in common, and again repeat, it's very important for patients, is the same quality standards. I found a nice sentence in a publication describing the approach in Poland. This lack of definition of non-routine basis, it's a deliberate omission by the legislator because we have, as a matter of fact, different healthcare systems, and hospital exemptions are deeply rooted in the national healthcare systems. This lack of definition, however, leads also to other types of uncertainties and other considerations that can be addressed, need to be addressed when we talk about hospital exemption. One is the balance between the unmet medical need and the scientific uncertainty. This is a typical discussion we are having in our commission where we discuss the request for authorization. But also the balance between the access to innovative products with no commercial interest and the possibility to develop products with large-scale access and market access reaching all patients. There has been a debate about lack of transparency. We know that the pharma revision is going towards a European-wide registry, and this can really be a helpful tool to foster also and support innovation through hospital exemption developed by academia. One very important benefit of this provision is that it has prevented unethical medical tourism or direct-to-consumer exploitation. And I can tell you that we've seen at least a couple of cases, one with ATMPs, the other not, of exploitation. And I wonder how marketing offices of these so-called, let's call them companies, do not understand that at AIFA.gov.it, is not the address of a competent authority. So we could find out some of these cases, and they're really good in trying to exploit patients. So welcome any tool that can safeguard patients from fraudulent products. However, the main issue, the question mark, and the discussion that has been also already addressed several times this morning, is whether hospital exemption is a tool for innovation, so supports innovation towards access to medicines for all, or it can block innovation by competing with the development of to-be-marketed medicinal products. We know that products that are developed to be marketed have very stringent requirements, high development and production costs, and these costs are then reflected on what will be the outcome. We've heard about HTA and all the discussions that can come afterwards. Hospital exemption has lower requirements, reduction in production costs. This can help, this should support science and progress and development, should not be an obstacle. That could be maybe the question and the incentive that hospital exemption can represent to innovation when it's not ideal, it's properly managed to cover both unmet need and at the same time stimulate research and stimulate cooperation between academia and pharma companies in order to, I've lost my presentation, in order to develop products for all. Just a brief touch on our experience in Italy. We receive around 40 applications per year. We've received so far over 300 applications since the implementation of the national law from 20 applicants, and we have 9 facilities at national level. The number of indications is increasing. You see the CAR-Ts that I've mentioned this morning that were alongside the clinical trial where there were no longer possibility for enrollment. We don't have any mandatory requirement of previous clinical trials, so sometimes it can be tricky to assess the scientific evidence, but we need scientific evidence. We also strive to transform hospital exemptions from academia into clinical trials, and you've heard a lot of the difficulties that academia has in starting trials. So far, only 3 clinical trials have started with products that were only used within the hospital exemptions previously. In conclusion, we know that hospital exemption can have very different implementation at national level due to national legal implementation, the local policymakers' interpretation, lack of clarity of guidance at European level, common guidance, but different guidance at national level. And also the level of research. So the wish of from now on and today's discussion and also the future with the pharma revision is that we can create a system where both the use of this pathway, this very, very useful and powerful pathway we have, will be filling on both filling the gaps for patients who need access to a treatment where no treatment exists, and at the same time support innovation and development of new medicinal products available for all patients with harmonized implementation and using what we have built so far and improving it in the future. And I will close with this survey from ADEA that will be presented next week. We are very curious to hear. Italy will be present at the presentation of this survey. It will inform a lot about the potential of hospital exemption, the development of this tool in the future, and how this will bridge the gap between science, academia, and access to market and treatment for all patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra, for your presentation. A very balanced presentation on the hospital exemption and providing the insights from Italy and also highlighting the importance of the survey from ADEA. So we would like to open the floor for questions from the public. Are there any? Yes, Sandra, go ahead.
I have one question on the GMO. A question that I've been raising so many times, the GMO and what will be maybe the future approach, and if this solution can be considered like a real solution to the fragmented approach we have now in Europe, or as Tony said, we are just shifting the elephant from one burdensome approach to an increase in workload and maybe also a bottleneck, thinking of all, for example, mononational academic trials all going through the same GMO assessment at CHMP. So if it's just a shift in the elephant, or really can be a benefit for the system.
I think there is already an improvement in the shifting from legislation anyway. That's the first part. And it's also very good to have a system to harmonize really with guidance that can be followed by developers, but also by assessors that can harmonize. The shifting to the CHMP is, for me, something much more difficult to understand, because we have that system of clinical trials where you could also have had this task of assessment even at the time of CTR. Actually, that was a first missed opportunity. But I'm a non-clinical assessor. It means that for when I assess chemicals, I also assess environmental risk assessment. This is one of my tasks. I could also do that for GMOs. It's not that complex, and also the majority of these products do not have an impact on the environment. So we should simplify a lot this procedure also by just having a lot of exemptions, saying this type of products, lymphocytes modified, not even using a viral vector, so there cannot be anything left in that preparation. They should not be considered as GMOs. So I think there are steps. We would do step further, and we could have simplified even more.
So actually, I will start with the questions that we have on the screen. Is biomaterial used for bioprinting of cells considered a medical device? It is also linked to a question that I had for Ilona. So in the real world, how easy to classify combined ATMP? So this is really a white and black situation always?
I think it's difficult to give general answers. I think in this specific case, it's a material. It's not independently an entity of a device. I would actually go a completely different way here and say that is probably a novel excipient for the bioprinting of cells in this specific case. But I think it would need to be looked at in detail. My feeling would be, without knowing, it's always difficult to give an answer based on a one-liner. And it also needs to be emphasized that for ATMPs, the consultation process is different. It's not Article 117 as we have in the MDR. It's a dedicated consultation process, which also involves the applicant and the notified body. It unfortunately hasn't been used since it was established.
I think that by age, I'm allowed to share with you a reflection, but you can react, of course. Because this morning we were talking about the threat that we feel from the US, China, India. And when you realize that OMG disparities in Europe, in Spain, an OMG approval takes longer than the clinical trial approval itself. About devices, about hospital exemption policies, are we surprised that we are in a difficult position in front of the big regions? And to my understanding, we need to make a true effort to make a real European policy on all these areas. I mean, it does not make any sense. And for industries, for big industries particularly, that they have some resources, this is, I wouldn't say easygoing, but they have the resources to cope with all of that. Issues for academic development is a nightmare, I can tell you.
And I just say, it's also not easy for regulators. And I think what you should never forget is the regulators are not the ones making policy. We execute the legislation. We are not the ones writing it. And so particularly when it comes to interfaces, it's not that easy for us either. But I think what really is needed is a top-down order. There needs to be a solution.
Yeah, I have a question about the number of hospital exemption programs in Italy. So we've 40 this year, and I think you mentioned over 200. I was just wondering how many of those will actually make it to the market? And is this actually almost preventing, making it so easy for products to go into hospital exemption? Is it preventing products getting to the market? And is this playing almost against products being developed in Europe and allowing the true biotech being developed in America and Asia?
Well, sorry, I was terrified by time, so I went very fast through my presentation, and maybe I didn't clarify. In Italy, we have a single patient authorization, so 40 means 40 patients with academic products not intended for marketing. And in Italy, we also have this mandatory clause that you can have access to hospital exemption if there is no alternative treatment whatever. So independently if it's ATMPs or any other kind of treatment. So at least in Italy, we are not worried. We don't see hospital exemption as something hampering, as an obstacle to or a competition to marketing, to be marketed, or products, ATMPs that are developed to be marketed. It's a different approach. So we are one of those member states where it's for single patient, individual prescription, and each batch is one patient, and each authorization is one patient, even in the same setting or the same indication. So 38 authorizations can be even 5 for the same product, but it's each one of them counts for one authorization. So, but it depends. I have slipped through the presentation on control select, the commercial reasons for the withdrawing and the presence of control site ATMPs under hospital exemption in Germany that impacted heavily. We had different scenarios, different also situations across member states. But at least in Italy, we are not worried. It's all covered by a healthcare system, and these are really 332 patients treated, not products.
Thank you very much. I think that we are running out of time, but I see many questions that are coming on the Slido, and I will announce there will be a Q&A document at the end trying to answer all of these very relevant questions that you're putting on the platform. So thank you. So we have a very short coffee break, so please come back in 10 minutes. Thank you.
So please, we are inviting to take your seats. Please, we are going to start in 2 minutes, even less. So welcome back after the coffee break, and welcome to the last session of this workshop. So we had a little discussion on how to entitle this session, and then in the end Paolo Foggi came up with this nice reality check case studies. And you may wonder why, and the answer is that basically now we want to know what's going on out there and how ATMP developers are doing while we are busy with the assessment of your procedures. So we have 3 great speakers today, one from Hospital Clínic de Barcelona, Teleton Foundation, and Holostem, and hand over to Paolo for the introduction of the first speaker.
Thank you, Barbara. So let's start immediately with the first speaker. The first speaker is Gonzalo Calvo. He's from Hospital Clínic in Barcelona, and he has a long-standing experience in the regulatory field, being a member of the CHMP for 9 years, right? Okay.
Thank you. And thank you to AIFA, to Paolo, to Eleonora, and thank you from the bottom of my heart to Joanna, because just before I forget, Joanna and her team, I'm falling in love with her. And not because I'm a man and she's a woman, it's because she is helping the Spanish academic structure to reach goals that we never imagined we could have reached. So it's not a matter that my hospital is brilliant. No, my hospital is brilliant. The Spanish agency is behaving brilliantly. So I'm here to share some experience, but I have also learned for the good and for the bad during the morning session. So it's been a very productive meeting for me. And I will go fast because you know everything that, of course, the advanced therapies medicinal products should go through the centralized procedure, but the regulation itself contemplates the possibility for the hospital exemption, and this is to be developed nationally in each individual country. So the rules are clear, but the way the rules are implemented are substantially different across countries. And this is what I mentioned in my intervention before, is that why not the hell we could try to harmonize these rules? Not necessarily following the Spanish model, but a model that can accommodate to all European countries. And in Spain, I think we are not the first and the best country for almost anything except olive oil production, maybe basketball and so on. But in this area, we have been pioneers. I mean, the government was pioneer, developing immediately after the European regulation a royal decree targeting the development of hospital exemption approvable products. And they were at the very beginning, we felt they were very conservative. And very conservative because it is like a centralized application. I mean, we need to be GMP. We need to produce according to GMP. We are inspected by the Spanish agency. The quality requirements are the same as for the centrally authorized products. The non-clinical requirements, I'm scared every time that we go for scientific advice about the non-clinical assessors because they get crazy sometimes. But we are used to follow the normal European standards. And they, of course, require clinic experience, clinical trial before granting the hospital exemption. In this context, is quite similar to the European marketing authorization. The clinical trials are of the size that they are because we are in rare disease, we are in difficult situation, the funding capacities of a public hospital are not the same of a big pharma, but we need to present clinical trials, and we are running, and now we are prepared to go for central marketing authorization. We are prepared. I am not telling that we will get approval. That is that we are prepared to go. So we have two examples, and I will present the new one. We have, and you know, because it was in 2021 that we got the hospital exemption for a CD19 card for the treatment of LLA of adult population above 25 years. At that time, they only approved for the so-called unmet medical need because Kymriah was in the market already and was reimbursed. So they granted the hospital exemption only for that part of the population that had not met their target. Afterward, the cartridge came, but the cartridge has not been reimbursed. And we can talk afterward. What is the difference between meeting an unmet medical need in the regulatory context or meeting an unmet medical need in the reimbursement context? Because we have a huge number of CAR-T and ATMP, but in fact they are not available in many of the European countries. Now we are facing the most difficult part. We got the PRIME designation in December 2021. Then the interaction with the European Medicines Agency has been a rolling advice with them, very useful, a little bit more bureaucratically complex than with the Spanish agency that is more face-to-face. And with the Spanish agency, what we get is not only scientific advice, but it's also education. I mean, they advise you how you have to do things in order to do things right. With the EMEA, they are also, in the meetings, they are very, very interactive, but in order to convene a meeting or to ask a meeting, the IRIS system and so on is quite complex. But we are happy with both agencies. We are very enthusiastic of interacting with regulators. So we got also the PIP approved. We need to present an update before submitting the marketing authorization, but the PIP was a huge discussion with the PDCO and with the scientific advice meeting, but we got an approval. It's a difficult issue because you have Kymriah, and then you have to cover the so-called unmet medical need. And the good news is that in July this year, we got a hospital exemption approval for a CAR BCMA to treat multiple myeloma. We are now in the process of negotiating reimbursement policy by the Spanish government. And again, is this an unmet medical need? It depends. It depends. First, because not all BCMA cards are reimbursed in Spain, but in addition, because BCMA, the target population is immense, is huge. Multiple myeloma is the second more frequent hematologic malignancy. So with one or two cards in the market, you don't cover all the necessities of the big country, 40 million inhabitants in Spain. So it's an unmet medical need to some extent. But of course, we have the industry alarmed because of that. I don't think there is a room for alarming, but we may discuss later on. So in order to speed up, because Barbara threatened me with firing me out from here, I have just some suggestions that I have shared with regulatory authorities sometimes, but I think it's worth to share with academic assistants as well. The first is where I think that regulatory authorities can improve or have a little bit more common sense, I would say, is in the risk assumption. I mean, it's not the same that you are developing a drug for irritable bowel syndrome that is not life-threatening, that is a treatment for life, and that you are very much concerned about the long-term outcomes, carcinogenicity, cardiovascular risk, whatever you want. But if you are aiming at treating a patient with a 2 months life expectancy, personally, I don't care about the potential carcinogenicity 10 years ahead. Personally, probably I'm not a smart person, but I think that the risk assumption should be balanced with the risk that the disease itself
Less than
implies.
2 minutes left, Gonzalo.
Yeah, implies for the patient. I told you. Second is we need more flexibility. In general, this is speaking with European colleagues. In Spain, we don't have any complaint in this regard. They are absolutely flexible. But as far as I have been told in some European countries, I will not mention, there are some difficulties in reaching. They have to understand that we need to meet all the requirements, but that we have some limitation in the funding capacity. The fees, we will talk, particularly in the centralized marketing authorization, we will have to talk about that. And the open mind for new approaches. I mean, one of the problems of the CAR T cell production and the price and so on is the centralized production of the cell product. We are trying to develop a point of care in Europe that you send the lentivirus and then each center produces their own CAR T cells. It has also regulatory implications. It needs comparability and so on, but in the long run, I think it's more feasible. What we need, and this is the last, I promise. What do we need? Well, I think that there must be many physicians and physicians too here, and we need to forget that we are only academics. We are drug developers, and we need to stick strictly to the quality standards. Otherwise, we will be failing. We will not be doing the right thing for the patients. This is a battle that I have with my hematologist and with my immunologist, is please retain yourself when you want to send the lentivirus to the whole world, to the whole developing world, because they are producing a drug with your lentivirus, and you will be responsible for that. So take care and take care with external communications. They communicate as we are doing, we are discovering a new world. Come on. Put things on the adequate magnitude, because we can have a crash at the end. And we need, and I think this is something I think I help because I was a regulator.
Gonzalo, please.
Yeah, 1 minute. 30 seconds. I was a regulator, so I convinced my hospital that we need a regulatory thinking strategy and to build up a team. We are 10 persons, but in most of the hospitals, there is no one to guide from a regulatory perspective the people who is developing this CAR T. And that's all. Thank you.
So thank you very much for your talk, and sorry for interfering that much. Now the second speaker, Celeste Scotti, is Head of Research and Development at Fondazione Teleton. And the floor is yours, Celeste. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Barbara, and thank the organizer for inviting me, sharing the experience of Fondazione Teleton with you. So some of you here may be familiar with Fondazione Teleton, knowing Teleton as a funding agency. What probably some of you may not know is that in the recent couple of years, we are undergoing a transformation into a market authorization holder. What happened was that, as it has been featured here in Nature, the biotech company that licensed 3 of our programs, one of which on the market for the treatment of ADAS-Kid, dropped the programs, and we took them back. So we decided to maintain them accessible to patients, and they have been and are still accessible to patients, in particular the treatment for ADA-SCID, making ourselves a market authorization holder. So a bit of history here. As you can see, our institute was founded in 1995 as a joint venture with the Hospital San Raffaele in Milan. They developed the first gene therapy that was for ADA-SCID in that case, and through a collaboration with a pharmaceutical corporation, they managed to obtain approval in 2016 in Europe, the first ex vivo gene therapy approved in the world. Now, what happened is that in a couple of years, this company out-licensed, divested, the immune deficiency portfolio to a biotech company, which maintained them for a few years on the market. But in 2023, they dropped them, and we took them back. So what happened is that we transformed from a funding agency to a market authorization holder, and this was a huge transformation which required a big change in our organization, but also required unparalleled support by the regulatory agency. And I'm happy to say that we received and are still receiving a lot of support from AIFA and EMA in particular. So a bit of background to understand what we are doing. We exist as a charity to support knowledge aimed at developing treatments and cures, possibly, for genetic rare disease. The way we do it is through cutting-edge technologies. We work with some of the best scientists in the world in the area of genetics and gene therapies. We have a team that has a huge pipeline, I have to say, right now in development, clinical or preclinical. And we try to combine both a philanthropic approach, but also working with industry and with VCs to bring forward our programs. Just to make you familiar with what we are doing now, we have 3 therapies available to patients right now. So one is the one for ADA-SCID, which is approved in Europe. The therapy for Wiskott-Aldrich is available in Italy under Law 648 for early access, which has been a great tool, I have to say, that allowed us to treat up to 5 patients. I think the 5th will be treated beginning of next year for ADA-SCID. In the last year, we treated 4 patients. The 4th, I think, will be treated by Professor Aiuti's team in a couple of weeks. So we managed to make it happen thanks to the framework available here, and Law 648 has been a great tool. Libmeldi, then, as you know, is approved in EU and the United States for metachromatic leukodystrophy. There is one therapy in phase 3 for mucopolysaccharidosis type 1, 2 assets in phase 2, and a very large preclinical and translational pipeline right now. I'm going to share a few cases about our experience. So this is the number 1. So how we started. So changing the market access authorization, the market authorization paradigm, becoming an holder as a charity. So this required a huge transformation internally. As you can imagine, we need to acquire lots of expertises, and today I'm happy to say that we have internal expertises for regulatory affairs like CMC, QA, CMC. I'm very proud of the team we are building these days. We managed to complete the product transfer and to treat the first patients. One of the positives definitely is that the point of contact model at EMA makes communication consistent, and this is something we really appreciate, and we're really willing to keep discussing and keep an open discussion as partners with the regulators. Treating these patients remains difficult, especially those outside of Europe. It's really tough, and sustainability remains a challenge because, well, it's a 2016 pricing, and manufacturing these therapies cost a lot. And for a charity, this is obviously not easy. Number 2, the filing for Wiskott-Aldrich. So this is a further evolution for us from market authorization holders to fully fledged drug developers, from preclinical to launch. Basically, this is what we want to cover for patients with genetic rare disease. We are planning to submit a centralized MAA in Europe and a BLA in the United States in the coming months. We have an orphan designation in both areas. We have a rare pediatric disease designation in the US, and we've been accepted to the EMA ATMP pilot scheme, which is another great initiative that has been supporting us. And as I said, this drug is available to patients in Italy under Law 648. We've had multiple interaction with EMA preparing for the submission, And this has been, again, a great collaboration, I think, for us. Alignment, with all stakeholders to achieve sustainability and use of optimal resources still remains challenging for us. But we want to do even more. We want to be the ones, together with others, obviously, as we've seen today, innovating and driving regulatory excellence and innovation. So we started working at TGET on a platform approach for the treatment of for novel ex vivo gene therapies for the treatment of lysosomal storage diseases, leveraging on our experience on metachromatic leukodystrophy dystrophy and MPS 1. The idea is to have one core technology capable to target multiple disease as long as they have common characteristics and they can be pulled together without an identical target. So it's not the same therapy for multiple diseases. It's one platform, backbone technology, where we could change only, let's say, the transgene to target the specific mutation of that particular disease. The idea is to have one lead project, and we will prepare a full data package as usual, but then to plug in multiple projects on this platform with a reduced data package, CMC, product-specific data, for example, all filling into a master clinical protocol with clinical endpoint that are basically similar because these are similar conditions and can be analyzed together. This is early days. We are working on the preclinical package in these months, and we plan, obviously, to engage and have an open and transparent discussion with AIFA on the core approach. This can be a way to achieve sustainability and to treat multiple diseases and study multiple diseases at the same time. So there are 8,000 genetic rare diseases. One by one, it's going to take a long time. In conclusion, as I said multiple times today, for a charity, being a market authorization holder is challenging. There are very high costs. We need to streamline manufacturing and development, also doing shorter development plans using seamless study designs, adaptive study designs to be agreed upon with the regulator, obviously. Pricing and access are paramount here, and achieving a sustainable pricing is going to be critical for us, and also to grant access worldwide. For a charity like us, there is a risk, though, something that I'm always asked: are you going to now spend all your funds for therapies, or you're still going to fund basic research? Well, we have to do both. That's the answer. And luckily, we can manage to do this. In terms of regulatory landscape, we like to think at the regulators as partners, and we would like to foster a collaboration and keeping them engaged. At the end of the day, we both work for the public. And as you can see here, there are opportunities also, not just challenges for us. We don't have shareholders. We don't need to pay dividends at the end of the years. We only have stakeholders, and the main stakeholder is the patients, which is the same stakeholder of everybody working for the public. That's why we see regulators and HTA bodies as partners. Our research is funded by donors, so we don't need to recover that investment, which gives us an advantage compared to industry, although our funds are obviously very limited. Consortia can help a lot if you can create synergies at European level, working together in the same direction, avoiding duplication if possible, can be very useful. Incentives, last but not least, public grants or activities like the priority review voucher by the FDA, maybe not exactly like the PRV, but could help a lot sustainability. So in conclusion, I'd like to highlight how non-profit organizations like ours can fill the gap left legitimately by industry in the ultra-rare space. We have also a responsibility, though, to demonstrate that this is sustainable and we don't just fill the gap with our funds, but we are able to create a sustainable framework. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Scotti, for this very nice presentation and very didactical experience of Teleton. Now it's the turn of Dr. Latella. She is Quality Control Manager at Holostem. and she will give us an idea of what's going on and the whole story of Holostem.
For this opportunity, and I am very happy to be here today. I will give a brief introduction of Holostem. Holostem is a biotechnology company devoted to research, development, manufacture, registration, and distribution of ATMPs based on culture of epithelial stem cells, both for cell and gene therapy. Here we can see the evolution of Holostem that started in 2008, when Holostem Terapie Avanzate was founded as a spin-off between University of Modena and Reggio Emilia, the academic founders Professor De Luca and Pellegrini, and Chiesi Farmaceutici. Holostem obtained conditional approval from EMA for Holoclar in 2015. Holoclar is the first stem cell-based therapy that obtained conditional approval. It's important for treatment of limbal stem cell deficiency. Holostem consolidates its portfolio with the gene therapy experimental product for an epithelial rare disease as epidermolysis bullosa. And Holostem entered the process of liquidation at the end of 2022, and at the end of 2023, Holostem is acquired by Fondazione Eneatech and Biomedical. At the beginning of 2024, Holoclar received full marketing authorization from EMA. As you know, Holoclar is a stem cell-based treatment used to replace damaged cells on the surface of the cornea, and is classified as a tissue engineered product. Holoclar, in this picture, we can see the distribution of Holoclar in 8 different countries, and making it accessible to a large number of patients affected by limbal stem cell deficiency. Here we can see the treatment, the success of Holoclar for a patient's 1 year post-Holoclar treatment. In the left, we can see the eye of the patients who had suffered chemical burn. 3 years from, this is the eye 3 years from the accident, and in the right, we can see the same eye 1 year post-Holoclar treatment. By restoring the corneal surface, Holoclar improved visual acuity and improved the quality of life of these patients. Here we can see the long and complex authorization process for Holoclar until to obtain conditional marketing approval in 2015. Holoclar was approved from 3 retrospective studies and 150 patients. This is the timeline outlined the principal milestones to obtain for the development and conditional approval of Holoclar. All the process starting in 2008 when Holoclar was designed as an orphan medicinal product and was defined as an advanced therapy medicinal product. In 2009, the protocol assistance procedures were initiated with the CAT, and in 2010, Holoclar was defined as a tissue engineering product. In 2011, the scientific advice procedures was continued with PAY, and the protocol assistance follow-up procedures has continued with the CAT. In 2013, Holostem submitted the dossier regulatory to EMA, and we received a positive opinion the following years. And at the beginning of 2015, Holoclar obtained final EC conditional approval. When we embarked in this adventure, we believe we were preparing for a marathon, but we soon realized that there were many obstacles to navigate along the way. This is an overview of the key points of holoclar manufacturing process and the challenges in holoclar development from a product quality perspective. The holoclar manufacturing process is divided into phases, the primary culture and the secondary culture. All processes start with the training of surgeons, followed by logistic for biopsy, the biopsy processing controls, the feeder production, and the freezing of primary culture. The secondary culture starts with a new feeder layer production, the thawing of cells to produce the drug product, the packaging, transport logistics, and distribution. Throughout all the stages of the process, one critical points are represented by raw materials, and we monitor, the holoclar is monitored by over 20 quality controls. In the next slide, I discuss about 3 important points for quality perspective which require discussion with the regulatory agency, the feeder layer, the raw materials, and quality controls. Here we can see the quality challenges and how all of them overcame them. The first challenges was the requirement for GMP grade raw materials and non-GMP components such as animal serum, culture media, and growth factor should be replaced with GMP alternatives where available. But ATMPs producers know that this is not always possible. It's important, it's crucial to mitigating risk through controls or raw materials, the validation, and adherence to GMP standard. Another point, very important point, is the implementation of a rapid sterility test, which is suitable to deliver results prior to administration of holoclar. And we implemented this rapid sterility test, providing results within 3 days instead of 14 days of compendial method. And the last point, it was that required quality challenges, was the implementation on a method to quantify feeder contaminant cells that is crucial due to concern about the risk of contamination, immunogenicity, and transmission of infectious agents. And we implemented this method for both for drug substance and drug product. Sorry. Here I summarize the 4 important points of holoclar's journey and what we learn about this history. The first point is that holoclar received conditional marketing approval, reflecting the challenges encountered throughout the development process. The second point is that this experience highlighted the critical role of regulatory frameworks in promoting innovation. Third point is that holoclar exemplified the balance between advancing new treatments and maintaining a high standard for safety and efficacy. And the last point, that is holoclar set a valuable precedent for the development of additional advanced therapies. What we learn about this story is that holoclar provide valuable insights to regulators and developers on the complexity of advanced therapies. The developers learn the importance of navigating an uncertain landscape through close cooperation with the regulatory bodies. When holoclar obtained conditional approval, the journey was not over, and 2 clinical studies were required to obtain the full marketing authorization. The first one was holocor, the second is holocor follow-up, and we are ongoing a third study that is holocyte. Holocyte, it's important, is a past study, and this is important for assessment of safety and efficacy in standard clinical practice. I conclude my presentation with a take-home messages. The first one is that relationship with the regulatory authorities from the first development phase is mandatory. The second point is that the monitor every stage of the supply chain is crucial. And early product development should prioritize GMP-grade raw materials. The last point, but not least, because it is an important point, that the streamline processes and quality controls to customize the automation, standardization, and scale-up production to ensure the sustainable long term of ATMPs. Thank you.
So thank you, Maria Carmela, for your presentation. I think that we have 10 minutes for the discussion and some questions, probably even less. So do we have any immediate question here in the room? So no question from the audience here. Question from Slidos?
Ask me.
Okay, I think we have many questions for you, Gonzalo.
I'm not entitled to participate in the discussion because I ran out of time.
Oh, no. I think that there are many questions for you, and indeed you presented, let's say, a very stretched implementation of the hospital exemption at the European level. So we have the first question for you. Could the Spanish model be replicated in other EU countries? Are there possible drawbacks? Example given in terms of transparency on safety, increasing cost, etc. Do you want to take it?
Yeah, very shortly. I don't dare to tell other countries what to do. What I think that the Spanish model is quite conservative. I mean, they ask for a huge amount of information, and that's the reason because beforehand you presented, or someone presented, that in Italy they have 300 requests. In Spain there are 4 drugs approved under hospital exemption, but they meet the normal standard regulatory requirements, which is very hard for the developers, but and I don't know to what extent they can be exported or not to other countries. In Spain it's working, but I mean, each environment may be particular and peculiar. I guess that could be exported, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay, Paolo, go ahead, please.
Or if you want, Paolo. Okay, so the question is for you, so it's easier. So now the question was, I very much like the way the story of Teleton, and in a nutshell, I could say that it's a no-profit organization which succeed in taking products to the market. And what I also like that when there was no interest, they were so brave to get it back. But the question is not about that. The question is, in your view, what made the difference? Because I think that if I would be a no-profit or an academia, I would look at you as an example. So what's the secret? What's that worked so well that allowed you as a non-profit organization to get to the market and to get the interest of industry, to get the development, and then even becoming a marketing authorization holder within a very ethical, if I understand, habit?
Well, thank you. Obviously, this is a difficult question to answer. I'll try to summarize. I think the magic word here is ecosystem and incubator. So in our organization, first of all, we had the privilege to work with physicians and scientists like, Professor Aiuti and the others at TIGET and San Raffaele. So we had the treatment physicians, let's say, in-house. We had also the manufacturing very close to us, right? Initially developed within San Raffaele, then at CDMO, with whom we are still working. We equipped ourselves with as a not-for-profit biotech or a not-for-profit incubator. So we have all the competencies that you would normally see in industry inside. So the strategy here started a few years ago. That was not the plan, but they adapted to the changing environment. And at some point they said, okay, we have to do this, then we do it, right? Obviously, the funding was available because the funding was going well in this country, at least for us. And we managed to create an organization very lean compared to pharmas, where I've worked in the past, but still with all the competencies inside. So we managed to be sustainable and relatively lean because we could do in-house a lot of activities that are normally outsourced if you don't have the capabilities internally.
Thank you, Celeste. So I take the chance to ask a question myself to you. So basically, as Paolo mentioned, you are basically, Teleton is the first non-profit organization becoming a marketing authorization holder, and which means that you created a precedent, a nice precedent. So when such a shift of paradigm occurs, would you share with us what are the, in a very concrete way, the regulatory support that would be needed when such a shift occurs?
Well, let's say that, as I mentioned before, early engagement and constant support by the regulators are critical for us. So now we have the competencies internally to deal with you, to discuss with you, and this is something we're really looking forward to do more and more in the future. Like for the platform approach I mentioned, this is our plan, but we want to develop it together with you. This is something, this has to be a collective effort. As a charity, we are not a private company. Like we own, everybody owns us in a way, and we would like to see this partnership happening. Another example of potential, strategic collaboration is to ensure that moving forward there is a mutual recognition within Europe in terms of access, pricing, and if we could combine and streamline regulatory approval and HTA assessment to make it easier and faster to patients. There is also, we have limited resources in a way. We don't have a team of 50 people working on regulatory affairs, and for this reason we need to be lean and try to maximize efforts. Other ways of, collaborating even further is about fee reduction and fee exemption, because those are, of course, tough for us, but the ATMP pilot scheme for academics helps a lot in this direction, so it's great. I'm thinking at grants, public funding to support trials or post-trial, long-term follow-ups of therapies, or, I don't know, basket trials where we could, pool therapies and strategies in support of the therapies we are developing. And last but not least, incentives to incentivize not just us, but maybe other charities or other institutions to work on rare disease. I mentioned the priority review voucher by the FDA, but that's not the only one, obviously, because there are pros and cons. But making it more appealing for organizations to work on ultra-rare disease, I think it's something that could be very helpful for the environment.
Thank you very much. Paolo, do you have any questions?
Yes, one question for you, Maria Carmela, if you can answer, if it's not confidential. But because Holoclar is the first cell therapy ever approved on the market, the efficacy is fantastic. I mean, it's really impressive. And the patients are there. There's not an ultra-rare disease in which it could be difficult to find patients. So at the end, what went wrong with the company? If you can answer, because it could be useful for the many developers. But I mean, if you can, otherwise there.
And was there anything that regulator could do to avoid that
Okay.
process?
The main factor of liquidation of Holostem is that the main founders, Chiesi farmaceutici, has decided to no longer support the spin-off. And the reason of this decision can be various. But it's clear that one main problem of the ATMPs is the cost, is the sustainability of the manufacturing of these therapies. And this is a common problem for all producers of advanced therapies. And however, regulators can support companies through mechanisms like approval processes, but regulators are essentially in ensuring the safety, the quality of the product, but their role in directly preventing a company's liquidation is very limited.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
So do we have time for one more question, or should we close? Why not? Okay. So Gonzalo, again, for you. Again, on the hospital exemption, being part of the European network, so I know that besides the prime, RE001 is also included in the EMA pilot project supporting non-commercial developers. So I was wondering to what extent the product development has benefited from being included into this project, particularly in terms of marketing authorization application and then consequent availability at the European level, because right now you have such a good product restricted within the Spanish borders. So what's the plan for the future, and how helpful are these schemes for the development and the marketing authorization application?
There are two potential plans. The first is committing suicide, and the second is accept the situation as it is. No, they have been very helpful, both the EMA and the Spanish agency. The Prime initiative helped us in order to think in a wider spectrum of potential targets in Europe. That's the reason because we started to think about the point-of-care strategy. And now the rolling advice, when you are in a prime designation schedule, is really helpful. Problem is that we are scared because, drafting a dossier according to the requirements of the EMA that scientifically are not less, but in order the number of sections that you need to fill in is quite complex. In a big company, you have 20 persons dedicated to that, plus a CRO that is the writing model and so on. So it is very helpful. The regulators have been very helpful in both the national and the European, but we still need to work a lot.
So thank you for this further insight.
So thank you all of you for being here. Now is the time for the final round table, Paolo and Lawrence.
Do you want to start to say a few words when the...
Yeah, why don't I'll go up here actually and start up here. Okay. Okay, good afternoon everyone. My name is Larry O'Dwyer. I'm co-chair of the EU Innovation Network from the Irish Agency, and it's my pleasure to join Paolo Foggi from AIFA to co-chair this final session of the day. So during the day we've explored a lot of important themes and topics, and we thought it would be a good idea to bring them all together at the end of the session, or at the end of the day, with a multi-stakeholder panel discussion. And the idea is we're challenging each of the representatives you see on the stage here to identify what they see as the most pressing need and the immediate actions that we need to take to support the translation of innovative ATMPs into access for patients. So we have a wide variety of stakeholders on the panel, but one particular stakeholder group we're missing, and this was mentioned at the start of the day as well, is the patient voice. And I'm not sure if we still have patient representatives in the room or if we have them online, but during the discussion, after we hear from the panelists, we would be particularly interested in hearing from you, because it's very important that we round off that picture. And it was the original plan, but unfortunately, due to reasons outside our control, our originally intended representative was unable to join us. So it would be great to hear from you. Other people in the room will have an opportunity for questions, and also people online can continue to use Slido and we'll come to you. So one of the challenges with being the last session of any conference is obviously energy levels start to drain. But on a Friday evening, before a weekend in Rome for some people, it's even more challenging. So we do have a situation where some people have to leave us during the session. So we're going to begin with those. And first of all, Gonzalo, who will have one final few minutes left he had a long list, I think, in the previous session of actions he'd like taken. So it's an opportunity maybe to sum it all up, Gonzalo, pick out the most pressing ones, and give us your parting remarks. Thanks.
I'm the first because I have to leave, not because I have to be the first. No, I was proposed to raise an issue about to what extent hospital exemption has only to cover unmet medical needs, or could be simply put in the market, provided that they meet the requirements in order to help the access. So theoretically, there are a huge number of unmet medical needs covered by regularly approved, actually approved advanced therapies. But here you have is a very recent analysis published by IQVIA in April 2023, the actual access of the European patients to advanced therapies. So is what I mentioned in the roundtable is not the same to get the regulatory approval that covering an unmet medical need. You need to make the products affordable. The government has to make the financial effort to cover that, and we need to have a common discussion. I mean, because I have a theory that we are getting a little bit schizophrenic. I mean, there is a difference between the message and the meta-message. That is one of the theories of the origin of schizophrenia in Palo Alto, California, is that, okay, all of us are putting the patient in the center of the discussions. The governments want to secure the safety and the access to the drugs. Companies want the patient, but at the end, the discussion leaves the patients out. And companies want to get reimbursement and get return. Governments want to save money because the price is not affordable for many of the European countries. So we need to focus the discussion on the real issue and need to discuss what does it actually mean, patient access to medicine. Patient access to medicine is not getting the approval, it's getting the access. And maybe industry need a reflection about to what extent the pricing policy that they are following is sustainable, and member states have to think about to what extent they are prioritizing the right thing in the policy in general. In Spain, we have a very critical situation with the government. We think that they prioritize advertising rather than public health. But we are in a situation where nobody addressed the real issues. Patients are not getting access to advanced therapies. And we have a problem as a country, as an European country. We are having a problem. And it's particularly severe in less economically powerful countries, but it's also an issue in economically developed countries. So it's a big issue that we need to discuss, and I wanted to rise because the access is not only approvability, it's also funding the drug.
Thanks, Gonzalo. I guess that we decided that we have a first round in which we want to hear you about, of course, the people is following, feel free to react for the first point raised, but the question is the one question that Larry made is for everyone here in the table, especially for developers, I would say, and then I would expect that perhaps the representative of institution perhaps may react. Probably it makes sense. So I would lead the floor to Andrea now. Professor Biondi, please.
Paolo, thank you very much indeed for this and all the organizer for this fantastic day. And I'm going home as a developer and the clinicians with light and shadow, as normally you could say, because that is life, okay? But being a clinician involved in treating for almost 40 years kids with leukemia and dreadful disease, I am obliged to be optimistic, as you know. Otherwise, you can't go in the hospital for doing the job. But the lesson I learned today is that what we experience as the developer, we have listened many times from the speaker that we are far behind. And honestly, although I capture all the different tools that the European framework can provide to me, unfortunately, I didn't get the answer to that. But if I can provide a suggestion, I'm wondering whether by providing a specific call for developing in a proper manner or to find a way to support a clinical trial on something that has been covered by an IP, which is basically a strong issue for the innovation, is probably one strategy that can potentially help the academic and the developer. But I have another question from the clinical perspective, and I definitely follow what Gonzalo said. From the, not from the ultra-rare, on which today we did have the Teleton perspective as a potential way, which is very similar to what happened in the US as well, for developing treatment, advanced treatment for pediatric rare disease. But the situation we do have today for the CAR-T, access to the commercially available products in Europe, is that is not sustainable for all or most of our European rich countries. And so the question is, how are we going to leave to the doctor to say that you cannot get access to the patient, to the treatment A and B? Gonzalo referred to myeloma. Are we leaving to the clinician the decision to say yes or no? This is not sustainable. And so the question is the experience that Spain developed in a so brilliant manner, whether or not it's going to be the way to move on, a way to cover some way the unmet clinical need. An unmet clinical need can be not only what are not covered by the commercially available indication, but even the access of money. And this is an important issue to be considered. The lack of clinical study or at least a lower number in Europe as compared to other countries, I'm referring to academic, is not in the view of competing with the commercially developing products. Is potentially one way even to cover the unmet clinical need. Then, of course, the question is, what are going to happen to these products? And that's a question to Gonzalo that I didn't raise. But at least we need to be aware that with the universal perspective of access to health, we can't sustain at this time the current development of this innovative treatment, at least for the CAR T. It might be for the ultra-rare. But we have already experienced that for globin disorder, the gene therapy was not available simply, and remember, all the clinical development of the first gene therapy approach was done mostly in Europe, and actually in this city, in a leading institution of this country. Unfortunately, that product is not available throughout Europe.
Food for thought. I'm sure some of the other panelists will react. But we'll move on to get the next contribution, which is from Alessandro Aiuti from the Vita Salute San Raffaele University of Milan.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we have heard already before, and this is the experience of an academic centers which work together, San Raffaele Ospitato, Fondazione Teleton, in developing medicines for ultra-rare disorders. We have treated 150 patients. So it was definitely starting with the project in mind, is something that we learned, early interaction with the AIFA, with the Istituto Supporto, with EMA, which definitely helped us a lot, and there was really a constructive relationship of developing this together towards marketing authorization. We learned that you need to have organization, management, regulatory support, infrastructure to be successful, starting already to collect high-quality data from non-clinical and clinical trials, even during early phase. It will also help eventually to get the marketing authorization with a limited number of patients for ultra-rare disorders. The hybrid model worked, industry, CDMO in late stages, although we know that it also failed from some commercial aspect. And we knew also that you can get, for ultra-rare disorders, both approval and HTA reimbursement, even from a single trial, pivotal trial. No need for randomized trial in this case, with the data are robust. And also we learned that it's possible to have patients coming from other EU countries to have treatment in Milan, as we heard this morning, under the S2 cross-border scheme. That's fine. So this is what worked, but there are still many things which are not working, things that we need to improve together, and that's the reason why we are here. I think definitely the issue of this investment for the industry, for ultra-rare, but also for other diseases is crucial. And Teleton initiative is great, but certainly Teleton cannot call for all the rare diseases and for diseases, so definitely we need other type of solutions. I think that we need to find ways to innovate regulatory regulations, which is driven by science, as we heard this morning, and definitely ways of avoiding to repeat data, to repeat experiments. This will save time and monies. And I think that also resources are crucial. The type of resources for production, for late-stage clinical trials, commercialization, are beyond what is usually the academia can have. So we need either special funds, joint funding, European level funding. And finally, also, I think we've heard about the problems of access and the S2 scheme, which was not meant for cross-border, for patients traveling to other countries, but it's probably currently one of the only solution, but it's not optimal, because for some cases you still need specific patient approval, lengthy approval, refusals from some countries, what is the right for the patient to have access to a medicine that is not available and is the only one. So this is something that we need to work all together, and just perspective, but I really hope that we can improve this and work together.
Many thanks, Alessandro. Very, very interesting, and yeah, based on true experience. And now I would lead the floor to Leila. No, not Lina, Leila. Sorry.
Pascalia, Lina.
No, it's Leila.
I'm sorry.
Amini, because we wanted to hear before the developers, and then, sorry.
Yeah, so maybe I can take up two issues which were mentioned already throughout the whole sessions. So one is the harmonization, because I think it's really important and it's still important. And I can give you one practical example. So although we have the same legislation, it's interpreted many times in many different ways, and maybe it's because of so many uncertainties. So I think we need to form common standards, and there everyone has to be involved, and it's somehow the duty of the whole community to agree on common standards in the end to develop safe and efficacious products, because I think this is the goal for everyone. And just the example I know from my own experience in Germany, so we have, when we apply for marketing, for a manufacturing authorization, we have to apply to our regional authority to get this. And we have 16 different authorities, and they all interpret the same legislation in different ways, resulting, for example, in the same device being required to be either in clean room class B or C or whatever. And I think this is not a basis. So we have to agree on common standards, maybe even Europe-wide if it's possible, and step down for the higher aim, I think, to in the end reach what we want. And then another experience that I've seen in many different projects is somehow the difficulty of planning, of course, because we see so many unprecedented developments and then new technologies coming up and so on. And many of the funding schemes, the current funding schemes, are limited to 3 to 5 years. And it's really difficult to develop a product within this time frame. And I think if an agency or a funding body commits to provide funding for a certain product, then it should be somehow continuous and, of course, based on achievements. But sometimes it's basically not possible to proceed to what maybe even was overestimated by the own developer in this time frame. And so we need to adapt this somehow and make it maybe based on achievements, and maybe also be more realistic on the developer side, or have help to actually somehow estimate how realistic and how feasible it actually is to get what we actually promise, because sometimes this is not realistic. And these are the 2 points I wanted to mention here.
Thank you, Leila. I think funding came through as a very strong theme during the day, and I think you've expressed it very eloquently there. So we move on. We're now going to get the industry perspective, and Riccardo Ino joins us from Federchimica Biotech. I don't know why they asked an Irish person to come to Italy and pronounce Italian words, but anyway.
Okay. I think it's really important to focus on a specific point regarding the sustainability of this kind of drugs, because we know very well that we are in a new era, and we know very well what's happened when the patient is treated with this kind of drugs, because transform the life of this patient. And for that, we need to work together to try to find solution to cover the cost of these drugs. You know, for the company point of view, it's very expensive to prepare this kind of drugs, a lot. And sometimes are ultra-rare disease, and this specific point is critical to recover the money to achieve our break-even. But the patient is the first point of us, and we consider the possibility, because we worked a lot regarding the way to find solution in terms of cover the gap in terms of cost. During the last 3 years in ASO Biotech, we worked to try involving regulatory office, involving politician, a specific fund for this kind of treatment. And we found a solution for that. Obviously, it's not easy because we have a disconnection from the treatment to the result. And this disconnection is not easy to cover, but at the moment we found in AIFA, we found in politicians a very strong commitment to try to find this solution. I think, reminding on that, the future is very brilliant for this kind of patient because all of us try to put on the table the possibility to, I don't know, discard our directly interest and to try to work only for the patient. And it's really important to know that the patient is the first. Obviously, the business is really important, but at the moment, considering that we are in Europe, our continent is the old Europe, need obviously maintaining this kind of systems because we have universal system in several countries. The only way is to try to find together this kind of solution. And another important point, just because I have the possibility to share with you, is the point regarding the data protection and eventually the marketing exclusivity, because only in this way, obviously, we have the possibility to guarantee to this company to invest in this kind of environment. Remember that for us, this kind of drugs are investment. It's really important to know that, investment. It's an investment for the company, it's an investment for the countries, because only if we consider investment, this kind of treatment, we have the possibility, obviously, to find solution, and in this way, to guarantee the sustainability of the system.
Okay, so I guess that we heard all the perspectives of developers. And so I would like now to hear the point of view of institutions and or people that from the regulatory side. I would start with you, Ilona, if you don't mind.
No, it's fine. I just need my slide because I forgot.
Yes, but yeah, here it is. There is a lot of people working behind the scene. Thank you, and yeah, here it is.
I'm of advanced age. Yeah, no, I think we need to focus on the principles of the legislations because sometimes we get lost in the details. So the principle of the legislation is safe and efficacious products for the patients, robust data, and I think that should be the common denominator and not getting lost with administrative requirements. So I think that is clear one. The discussions are ongoing. We are actually, and Marianne could talk about that more, talking about a pilot process for IBD drug clinical trials. I think something that hasn't really been mentioned yet is that, you know, everybody here wants flexibility. Everybody here likes to generalize, i.e., should all hospital exemption be funded? My clear answer is no, because the hospital exemption looks so different in different countries, and I don't think there should be automatic reimbursement for products that have no data. So that's a very clear thing, and in order to be able to have an enforcement, you need rules. So there needs to be a very close balance between providing sufficient flexibility, but also sufficient rigorosity to enable both sides of the medal. Developing a medicinal product and maintaining a life cycle does require special skills. And what I've seen in research projects is that researchers sometimes find it difficult to make that switch. So if you do commit to developing a product, you also need to do that mind switch. And what we are seeing in Europe very clearly is those countries are succeeding in having a fruitful innovation framework where you do apply standards, but you also have the funding to back it up. Not the case in my country of origin. So I know what I'm talking about from that perspective, because if you don't have standards, you don't have incentives, and you don't have rewards for the people who are trying to do it right and who are trying to develop high quality. And so those are the points out for the moment.
Thank you, Ilona. Very nicely summarised. So now we turn to Pia. Pia, we know that from a HTA perspective, there are some pressing actions earlier in the new year with the implementation of the HTA regulation, but linked to that and other issues, what would you see from your perspective as the main points for consideration?
Yes, well, everything is all very pressing, and actually what I wanted to do was, it's a pity that Gonzalo just left, because I really wanted to answer his question, which is, shared by other people, and the point of the access to the patient. So we see that the biggest problem currently, from the graph that he showed us, is the amount of therapies that are actually reimbursed in Italy, in Europe. And it is foreseen that the implementation of the HTA regulation should smooth the process and should make an easier appraisal at national level, and that hopefully will allow for more products reimbursed. I think that the implementation of the regulation should also bring more transparency on the HTA process and allow developers to understand the inner workings of HTA. And if you understand how something works, then you can more easily try and go within those workings in order to have a higher efficiency and higher efficacy. And so hopefully the HTA regulation is going to address part of this. And then, of course, then there's the national assessment, which is something that has, of course, cannot be touched at the union level. In Italy, what I can say is that we've been trying to address the problem of the cost of advanced therapies and the fact that they are lacking a lot of information that are normally required for a new product, thanks to managed entry agreements that have been applied when possible and if necessary. But that is not a solution for everything we need. So we are showing that the Commission and the Union is moving forward for higher transparency and trying to speed things up. At the national level, at least we've seen what happens in Spain, what happens in Italy. I'm just telling, we are trying to go in the direction of higher access and faster access. But then I am wondering, is the industry coming with us? Is the industry really doing something? Because it's not for having a faster access that we can have trials that don't have the sufficient follow-up, that don't have enough patients enrolled, because this is going then afterwards to lead to a harder HTA or to a harder European assessment. For sure, there's going to be an obstacle at some point, so things need to be done well. And also, of course, the pricing is an issue here. Is it sustainable? Is it not sustainable? The industry says it's not sustainable. From the HTA assessment side, we cannot pay for everything. Payers in different countries cannot pay for everything that the industry is requesting. So we need to find common grounds. We need to increase the transparency of the processes. I think that in this moment we are at the verge of something that might change, and the Commission and also the national competent authorities are always listening for feedback. If there's processes and mechanisms that can be made more efficient, then this is the moment to suggest things in order to have a smoother process and higher access.
Okay, thanks. And now, Lina, I would like to come to you, because I guess that today we heard a lot of things. Me as regulators, I learned quite a lot of things and also I heard something on which perhaps we can improve. But clearly, I guess that both regulators and developers face some common issues that are based on policy. They can be fixed with policy. So my question to you is, with the pharma revision coming, what are the most important things that could boost the development and the ATMPs in you? What do you see? And if you want to tell about that from the Commission perspective. Many thanks.
Thank you. And thank you for the question. Since I was a very last minute entry in this round table, I didn't prepare a topic, but I can definitely answer this question. Already during this lecture, many points of the revision of the pharma proposal have been mentioned, but I could just point out a few that were not very in detail mentioned, but also some speakers referred, there were some presentations, I would like to give some more clarification. And I will start for, we really think that the proposal that the Commission has put in the negotiation table has several measures that will boost the development of ATMPs and remove the road blocks. And I will start first with the classification mechanism. We will try, we see more and more often complex innovative technologies and products that do not fit entirely into the definition of medicinal product or medical device or ATMP. So we move from the current scientific classification for ATMP, whether a product meets the criteria for ATMP, which is not binding because it doesn't mean that this procedure has not included the responsibility to judge whether a product is a medicinal product or not. So we move into a regulatory status classification mechanism, and we broaden the concept. And also with this, we hope that we'll create one single entry for the developers, and they will avoid navigating, because we see now also for request for a central marketing authorization at the agency, developers engage with national authorities for many years, and in the end they reach the European Medicine Agency in order to have a solid confirmation that their product meets the definition of medicinal product. So one is this. Second, I would like to point out that we introduce novel concepts because all the developers teach us that all these new cell and gene therapies, they are very much based into the platform technology. We have the mRNA, we have the adeno-associated virus, we have gene editing, all. So we introduced the concept of platform technology into the legislation, and we hope that this will accelerate the development of ATMPs, because we can use the consolidated knowledge that exists. Then I would like to mention that even for some definitions, we have updated the definition of gene therapy medicinal product. In the past, we had a definition which corresponded into, let's say, version 1 of gene therapies that aimed to replace a dysfunctional gene, but now we have gene editing that they try to repair the gene within the cell. So we have we have updated the definition in order to reflect these developments. There are other measures for the regulatory sandboxes that we also, and adapted frameworks, because there are two different measures. One is more temporal, the other will have more long-lasting effect. already there are some ideas for how to start implementing the regulatory sandboxes, what kind of requirements needs to be adapted in order to move forward these novel products and novel technologies. Now I would like to just give some clarification for the two presentations on the hospital exemption and on the GMO. It would be great it would be really very nice if we had addressed the issue of the GMO authorization in the clinical trials regulation. That was unfortunately a missed opportunity, and it was a great work, and we have great full respect to the people involved in the creation of the common application forms and guidance document, but this was never it never became mandatory, and it was optional for the member states to use it or not. So that was the basis for this proposal that is now on the table, but it's not the end, because we have explicitly mentioned that the work that has been done with the good practice documents will be the basis for the future guidelines, and we have a delegated act. So this idea, because also we follow the scientific developments that the then associated virus gene therapies have negligible environmental risk. We are not blind. So we hope that the network will cooperate. So during this delegated act, we will introduce some fast-track environmental risk assessment. And for the hospital exemption, we also understand that there is the problem of patient access, and we know that there are university hospitals that develop CAR-T therapies and other gene and cell therapies, and that's why we kept the hospital exemption in the proposal, because it still exists, and we still have the non-routine basis, which gives rooms for the member state to provide their own intended purpose. And we are very happy that we conducted this study, because we want to be transparent and to see 15 years after the implementation, after the entry into force of the ATMP regulation, we have a first-in-class study of what is happening on the ground, and we are very happy to welcome you next week in Brussels to show you exactly what is happening regarding the implementation and the functioning of the hospital exemption. And I will end with the Draghi report, since I'm in Italy, and there is it's very optimistic that there is explicit reference to the creation of world-class innovation hubs for ATMPs. That is an official acknowledgement for the importance of the sector in Europe, and the Commission will we will follow up on this. Thank you.
Lena, the efforts of the European Commission are very much appreciated in the room. And moving on that theme, Philippe, you've been very patient. Philippe is also from the EU Commission, and he's going to address how the Commission seeks to support innovation in the ATMP space, but from a funding perspective via EU for Health, etc. Philippe.
Thanks. Good afternoon. So as you see, the Commission is omnipresent, but it's to double our efforts for you. Talking about funding, I'm working in the European Commission in DG Santé, so the Directorate General responsible for health and food safety, in the unit that is dealing with EU for Health, the program about which you heard before the lunch break from Giuseppe. So not to raise too much expectations, this program is not to fund all the needs. It's not this 800 billion that it's needed every year, as Draghi report said, to boost innovation in Europe. We are tiny part of this amount. We are not part of this amount. We are tiny comparing to this amount. The program for years 21-27 was 5.6 billion, now it's 4.6 billion, because last year the council, so the member states, decided to cut the budget, not pointing fingers at anyone being in the commission, but I think it could be a lesson for you as different stakeholders in the health area, health sector, whatever we call it. I will show you in a moment, in my opinion, how well this program and the previous programs worked, but unfortunately this message doesn't reach the policymakers. There are different ministries in the governments. Some ministries are more prone to support health. There are others who look more at the budgets, and yeah, sometimes there is no dialogue between them. So probably that was the reason that the budget was cut. Talking about funding, as Lina mentioned, for example, the study on hospital exemption. So this study is funded by the program. The program as such, first of all, is devoted to implementation instead of supporting research and innovation. We don't want to step into Pia's turf, so not to take bread from Horizon. The overall idea is to simplify that what is created thanks to Horizon money then could be implemented thanks to the EU for Health money. However, since health as such is sole competence of the member states, we as the Commission have a very limited room of maneuver, mainly based on provisions regarding, for example, single market. The program is not to fund therapies, for example, or some other actions, core actions of health systems in the member states, but what we want to do and what we do is to answer at least one of the questions, the needs that was expressed today, so to support cooperation. You heard the story of cooperation between HTA agencies, then called UNETA. Finally, soon there will be HTA regulation in force. This cooperation from the very beginning was supported by health program. On a couple of occasions, some speakers mentioned cross-border access of patients to treatments, especially in north of Italy, in Milan. I didn't check it, but I'm 99.5% sure that this case is that the hospital in Milan is part of European reference networks, so ERNs, as we abbreviate them. Yes. So I'm 100% sure now. Thank you. This is benefit of interactions of the Commission with the stakeholders. So ERNs, these are the networks that connect centers of excellence, especially in the area of rare diseases, with the idea that in some cases, not patients travel to receive diagnosis and treatment, but the knowledge, the expertise can travel to the patients. So this cooperation between centers of excellence, it started several years ago in 2017, if I'm not wrong. And as maybe you remember from Giuseppe's presentation, usually EU for Health funds 60 to 80% of costs, or eligible costs of grants. ERNs are unique. 100% costs of functioning of these networks is funded by the EU Health Program. And with this, I want to touch upon our leitmotif of today's meeting, comparing ourselves to the US and China. I think we should be cautious not comparing apples to lychees. In case of these two countries, we are talking about countries. In case of the EU, we are talking about very close cooperation, but separate countries. Don't quote me on that. I'm not saying that we should have one country called European Union or one health system. Obviously, this is impossible due to historical, for example, reasons, many others. But what we should do, we should strengthen cooperation as much as possible. Sometimes this should be legally binding, then maybe it's not called cooperation, but acting together sometimes probably should be legally binding. This is how the single market functions. In many other occasions, as coming back to the example of HTA, we should start with sitting together, discussing, and then if we see a room for going closer to each other, we should capitalize on it. So to summarize, EU for Health program could be a leverage for cooperation. What are the areas of cooperation? This should come from you, either at occasions like that, or I'm paying attention to it maybe because my background is political science. It should go via governments, via heads of your state, of your countries, via your ministers. But if there is a demand for collaboration in the EU, we will do our best to help you to at least kick off this collaboration. Thank you.
Okay, many thanks again. Okay, so the Commission got the support of the right. It's nice, and I very much like that. Just because we are going to close, just perhaps a space if there is someone that wants to have a question for the panelist in the room. I guess that slide was closed, if I'm not wrong. Kieran, yeah, that's very good because I guess that you can also put patient.
Okay, so maybe I can just add the patient's perspective as I'm a representative of patient organizations on the CAT. So just a couple of things, I guess. Just if you look at the journey of ATMPs, to start off, I think one area that patients are, I suppose, interested in is at the very early stage of development of ATMPs, and that's the planning of the clinical trials, and particularly the inclusion of patient-reported outcomes and patient evidence-based. Patients are particularly concerned about inclusion at the very early stages, right through the development. And I think in a lot of cases this is included, and especially the likes of Telethon, which is a stakeholder group. But it's just something that needs to be considered, that patients should be involved in the development of medicines from the very early stage. Then obviously at the CAT, we know this is a very important group, and patients are full members of the CAT, and therefore are involved in the decision-making process. And I think that's really important, and it's very unique compared with the likes of, for example, FTA, where patients don't really have a full voice in the decision-making process. But then I think one of the key areas that I hear back from both the sort of my patient group, but just generally from the Patient Consumers Working Party at the EMA, is the whole area of what could be called postcode prescribing. And we saw earlier today about some countries where ATMPs are available quite widespread within the countries, and then other countries where they're not available at all. And I think this is going to be one of the key issues, and we've heard it mentioned in the discussion this afternoon by certain people. And I think this is going to be one of the key issues that we're going to have to face. ATMPs obviously are much more expensive than your traditional medicines. And we're going to have to come up with some mechanism by which this is going to be overcome, because we can't, the system as it is at the moment is not sustainable. This is one of the key factors that comes through to me and comes through at all levels from patients, that if we're going to develop ATMPs and we're going to develop these life-saving treatments, some of which just requires just one single administration, we need to come up with a sustainable mechanism by which we're not going to be just having these available just for a few people. And we've heard about the hospital exemption scheme, and this seems to work in patchy ways, in different ways. So we heard, for example, in Barcelona, where the hospital exemption scheme can be used as part of a clinical trial mechanism, and the product is then ultimately brought forward for marketing authorization application and hopefully a product developed. But then in other cases, the hospital exemption is just used for a product for a particular group of people, and it'll never go any further. So that's that's perpetuating the prescription prescribing, or the postcode prescribing. So then the question is that really an appropriate mechanism of use of hospital exemption? Because essentially what you're doing is you're just making that product available for a small group of people in a single hospital, and it will never get any further. Is that the proper way to use it? I don't know. But anyway, that's just a few thoughts.
Many thanks for this reflection, and I guess first of all they're coming from a patient representative, and secondly I guess that really raise important question and perhaps not a simple answer or the single answer, because some merits are there on hospital exemption. Probably I can personally agree with you that's not the solution of the problem, and also we have heard today that there is the possibility even for non-profit and academia to go on and develop and make drugs available to patients in a standard way. So I guess that, but yeah, I don't know whether Larry, you want to say a few words, then I'm going to close.
Actually, the key message I took away from this session is the most pressing need is more time. I think I took it from the entire day. But yes, just want to say I'm conscious that it's late. But I just want to say thank you very much to a couple of people. First of all, thank you to all the panelists, and thank you to the speakers and all the chairs we've had during the day. I think we've had some really interesting and enlightening discussions, and I think as someone who works in a regulatory authority, when you come and hear the different perspectives and the challenges that maybe we don't have to directly engage with from our own perspective, but you realise what the situation is on the ground, you leave with a better understanding of the landscape, and that helps you going forward. I'd also like to thank someone from our own secretariat, Esther, who's back at EMA and was helping us in the organisation of this meeting. And then just finally from me, on behalf of the EU Innovation Network, I'd really like to thank Paolo, Eleonora and Maria in the AIFA team. The last event we had like this was in Dublin, so I personally appreciate the amount of work that goes into organising an event like this, and I think they put in a huge effort, and I'd like to just give them a round of applause. Thank you.
Okay, many thanks to all. We are going to close this day, and I can only echo the comments, and then I want also to extend my gratitude to the chairs and speakers that were so kind to accept the invitation, and also to the people from the agency behind the scenes, including Esther from EMA and all the people behind the scene who without them, this one would have been impossible, really. So thank you very much again, and we took notes, and the name of this last session was a proposal for next concrete action. We will draw something from here, but I guess it was very, very useful to hear from you, and I guess that we hopefully also showed you many important information in session 2 from developers. And I just want to remind Monday, if you can, the regulatory science workshop organized at EMA, and the 21 the hospital exemption and commission. I guess that we all should try to listen each other, and this is our occasion in which we can learn and learn and learn mutually. Thank you very much.